when we build Beni, we wanted to really make it inclusive in a way that is, we talk about meeting shoppers where they are. And I think one of those things is understanding why they're purchasing the things they're purchasing now. And so rather than shaming someone for purchasing fast fashion, it's understanding, well, why are you buying that right now? It's like, well, you're buying it because you want to look cute at the wedding that you're going to, and this was the price point you can afford. It's like, great, let's then meet you where you are and say, hey, I also want to get you a really cute wedding dress, but I want you to get it at a price you can afford. But here's another way to get it that's a little bit more sustainable, and that oftentimes will leave you with a higher quality item in your closet.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the PlayBridge podcast. Today, I'm joined by Kate Sanner. She is the co-founder and CMO of Beni. Beni is the secondhand search engine that tags along while you shop online. Their free browser extension helps you discover the best listings from Poshmark, The RealReal, eBay, and more, all in one click. Prior to Beni, Kate built a career as the director of brand and innovation at Anheuser-Busch before pursuing her MBA at Kellogg, where she first started working on Beni. So, Kate, welcome to the show. How's your day going? Where are you joining us from?
Awesome. It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me on, Ruffin. I'm joining from Chicago and getting ready to head down to South by Southwest. So a busy but fun week ahead.
I know, and so excited to catch you at South by. So to start, bring us back to the very first version, the very beginnings of Beni. What was the original idea and what was the problem you and the team were trying to solve?
Yeah, for sure. So I think Beni was started really out of frustration. My co-founder, Sarah, kept hearing friends say something like, I know I should shop secondhand, but I just don't. And I think the reality is that people generally understand the benefit of resale. It's like, I know I can save a lot of money. I know there's cooler, more unique things out there. I get that it's more sustainable and that the fashion industry generally is very unsustainable. And there's like guilt associated with that. So resale is a way to solve that. I think even there's like some cultural or social currency to being able to say, I'm a thrifter. So like all the pros of why people want to shop secondhand. But then when you actually ask people like, but do you do it? They say, no, I don't. Like, I just don't have the time, or I never find anything good. And so there was just this moment where it's like, there's such a strong desire to do this thing, and yet there's so little people actually doing it. What is that piece of friction that's keeping people from participating in the resale world? And so when we dug into it, it really was search and discovery is super overwhelming. Resale inventory is one of one. There's no SKU numbers. And so in order to find something good, you're either going to thrift stores and sifting through a bunch of things, which is limited in geography. It's limited on what inventory came in that week. And so you don't always find, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. It's the thrill of the hunt, but takes a lot of time to do. Or your alternative is to search online, but searching online requires you to go to a number of different sites. They all have a slightly different user interface, a different way to search. And so again, it's just kind of this time-consuming, frustrating process. And so we kind of sat with that and said, okay, we get it. Like there's all these awesome value props, but also all of these barriers. Where can we fit? And I think ultimately the idea with Beni was, the status quo is super powerful, and the status quo is that people are going to brands and they're shopping new. And that is kind of the easiest, most linear path to get something that you want. And so rather than, trying to go to those people and say, hey, learn a totally new way of shopping, we instead said, what if we intercepted them on that path and brought resale directly to them? And that was really the impetus for Beni was, can we make it as easy to buy used as it is to buy new by bringing relevant resale alternatives to shoppers in their flow of shopping?
So one, very much resonate with the problem because I would definitely love to do more shopping secondhand, but it is like very difficult to go through all those sites, like find the exact item you're looking for. give us an example, like walk us through a bit more of how exactly the product works. And then was that what you originally built at Beni, or was there have there been any big changes since originally starting it?
Yeah, so we've been pretty committed from the beginning that the biggest opportunity from a sustainability and impact perspective was going after shoppers and getting them to change their behavior from buying new to buying resale. And so we started as a browser extension. So the way that it works is super simple. You install the Beni browser extension on your computer or now on your phone if you're a Safari user. And then as you're shopping any brand site, if you have Beni installed, we'll work in the background to check if there are resale listings that match what you're shopping for. And if there are, we'll kind of pop up with the notification saying, before you buy this new, did you know it already exists on a resale site? And here's a link to take you directly to that listing. And so what this does is basically arms the shopper with information to make the choice that's right for them. I think for me, I just got engaged, so I'm now deep into looking at all things white. So I just had this experience where I was looking at this beautiful white silk dress on a site. It was like $1,200, which is way more than I care to spend. And so I'm like, darn it, I'm not gonna be able to get it. And then Beni popped up and it was like, did you know this dress is listed on Poshmark for 60% off? And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I actually can get the brand that I want, the higher quality thing, the nicer thing, but at a price point that I can afford. So it's really fun to use Beni in my everyday shopping.
That's funny because I think weddings, that's a great use case. I sold all of my white shoes for my wedding, my white dress for my wedding, that my late night dress why would I ever wear that again? And hopefully someone either found it through Beni on the Real where I resold my items, or, someone put it to good use from there.
It's so true. I think just thinking about weddings has been a huge unlock for me recently. I think resale had this stigma of I don't want to wear something used, which I think has largely gone away. But weddings is a perfect example of there are so many things sitting in people's closets that you have worn one time. Or with brides, I think often they'll buy 3 dresses for the rehearsal dinner to then choose the one that they want. And it's so there's amazing inventory, oftentimes new with tags, that people are just trying to offload because I don't really have another use case for all of these white dresses. And so you're getting awesome deals, new with tags. And that just seems like such an obvious, there's so much inventory out there that it's really Beni is made to just help match the supply with the demand.
To the point of stigma, this is kind of a random question, but have you ever had brands block Beni from the website and basically they don't want Beni to show secondhand options? You don't have to name brands, but just curious if there's been any resistance from brands on that front.
We get that question a lot, and it's definitely a good one. I think the technical answer is that because we live on the browser, not on the website, it's really hard for brands to actually block us because we're just kind of improving the functionality of your browser. I think the more nuanced answer to that, though, is that I think there's actually a bigger opportunity. We don't want brands to be our adversaries. I think actually a lot of brands are starting to realize that resale and re-commerce in general is something that they can't avoid. And so you see a lot of brands starting to get into the resale game. And I think rather than them being someone that we're fighting against, I think it's more thinking about how do we bring branded resale inventory into our database so that we can help shoppers discover the brands that do have resale platforms. So one example of this, actually, we partner with Patagonia Worn Wear. So say you're shopping on Nordstrom for Patagonia, you might not be aware that Patagonia has a re-commerce site. We would maybe redirect you from a Patagonia listing on Nordstrom to the Patagonia Worn Wear site so that you can check out there. And so I actually think that resale can be an awesome customer acquisition tool for brands and a way to recruit kind of the next wave of shoppers who maybe couldn't afford the price point of the brand, but can through resale. So yeah, I don't think of brands as adversaries. I actually think that there's going to be increasing opportunities to work with them and to be a customer acquisition channel for brands the same way that right now we're a customer acquisition channel for resale marketplaces.
Definitely agree. I've started to notice so many more brands that even just have their own basically resale shops on their websites, which is so interesting to see and exciting to see this new movement towards that. So big opportunities for Beni. I'd love to go back to your days at Kellogg. How was starting a business in the MBA? I guess what resources were you and your team given, and how did you guys originally even start working on Beni?
Yeah, so Sarah had the original idea our first year of business school. So we both went to Kellogg. That's where we met. And she had the idea and pitched it in a case competition and ended up winning, which was really exciting. And so I think at that point she decided, I want to take this through. Kellogg has kind of a startup incubator program or class called New Venture Development. And so she was knew she had a good idea, wanted to build out a team. And we hadn't actually met at this point. I just kind of serendipitously was talking to a friend. I had just been reading the book Cradle to Cradle and kind of nerding out about circular models. And she kind of said, you've got to talk to Sarah. And so we ended up getting coffee right at the time that she was looking to build out this team and needed a marketing brand person. And so the stars just kind of aligned and I ended up joining that team and kind of the rest is history from there. And then Celine is our other co-founder. Celine didn't go to Kellogg, but another kind of serendipitous moment, we were looking for a technical co-founder to build out the product. And Celine is actually, Celine's landlord is Sarah's dad in Santa Barbara. And so they just got to talking and it was kind of a perfect match and they hit it off. So yeah, a lot of serendipitous moments for us to come together.
Why did you originally go to the MBA? Was it because you wanted to start a startup or what was your original, I'm going to go back to school?
Yeah, I had an interesting path. So I spent 8 years at Anheuser-Busch and really loved my job. It was such a cool place to work in my 20s. I worked with awesome people. I feel like it was an amazing place to kind of learn the foundations of marketing because in the beer world, brand is everything. And so you're trying to be culturally relevant. You're trying to tap into kind of all of these cultural moments and really build strong brand equity. And I got to work on some really cool things. So my last job before going to business school was the development and launch of Bud Light Seltzer, which was everything from briefing the brewmasters to decide what the flavors were, to designing the packaging, to building the commercialization strategy. And ultimately we launched at the Super Bowl with a spot featuring Post Malone. And so really a fun kind of whirlwind experience to bring that product to life. We launched it in the start of 2020 and then COVID hit. And so I went home to my parents in Indianapolis and like so many of us had this kind of, what is life? What comes next? What do I want? All of the reckonings. And I think it was that moment where I just kind of had this realization that I had graduated from undergrad, started at one company, just put my head down and worked hard, but that this was maybe the right time to pick my head up and say, do I want to be 40 years old in the beer business as my only career experience, or is this the time to kind of look around and see what else is out there and what I might get more excited about? And so decided to apply to Kellogg, only applied to Kellogg at the very last minute. I think it was the fourth round, and put my whole application together in 10 days. Found out,
Wow.
or interviewed a couple weeks later and found out a week after that I was in, and quit my job that day and moved to Chicago. So it was this whirlwind pivot, but really one that I feel so lucky for. But all of that's to say, I kind of came into school obsessed with the idea that marketing could be used for positive social change. I think ultimately, as marketers, we're trying to understand why people do what they do and get them to change their behavior in some way. And so it's like, I would love to use that skill set that I think I've learned to get them to change their behavior for the positive. And also knew that I wanted to go way smaller, not back into kind of a big corporate setting like Anheuser-Busch was, but try kind of the other end of the spectrum. I had no idea what that would mean or where that would lead me. And so I feel really grateful that the stars kind of aligned and I found Beni when I did, and that the concept just kind of hit on all of those things, because it is this big kind of cultural shift that's happening, and really a behavior change that I think would be really fun to try to understand and then be part of accelerating. So I had no idea what would come, and have lots of thoughts on business school in general, but I think really grateful for where it ultimately landed me.
One, did you help with like the Super Bowl commercial or Bud Light Seltzer?
I did. Yeah. I was on the Bud Light team for a number of years and then moved to Bud Light Seltzer. So was involved in 3 different Super Bowl spots, which was really, really fun. But our Bud Light Seltzer one was probably my favorite. We featured Post Malone was our big celebrity guest, and he's such a character. It was really fun to be on set with him and just see it all come to life.
You mentioned thoughts on the NBA. I always like to ask this question because I feel like I get it all the time after going to UCLA. Do you think the NBA is worth it? And also, do you think it's a good fit for people that want to start a business?
I think it was really worth it for me. I think I had worked at one company for 8 years, had one like very specific network. And I think, for me, I can acknowledge it's like such a privilege and luxury to be able to take 2 years to not be making a salary, to pay a bunch of money. Like it really is something that one isn't available to everyone, which I think is an issue. But also a huge luxury to have a safety net to be able to bet on yourself in that way and to be able to invest in yourself in that way. So I feel really grateful and lucky to have had the ability to do that. I think for me, I went in with a lot of intention around not wanting to take a job after that I could have gotten without going to get my MBA. And so immediately ruled out a lot of things that were like a typical MBA cohort into, another big company, because I was like, I feel like I could have made that transition directly from what I was doing. I wanted to use the experience to like really push myself to explore different things. And so had an internship in the VC world, which was like, I didn't know any of the lingo. I didn't know any of like how that world worked. And so yeah, I think it can be really worth it if you're really intentional about what experiences you want to have and what value you want to reap from it. But I don't know that it's necessary. I don't know that you have to do that. I think it's a luxury to give yourself the space to do those things. But it's not the only path to explore.
Very much resonate and agree with everything you just shared there. When you guys graduated, did you immediately go all in on Beni? Like, obviously you had, to your point, not taken a salary for 2 years, like school is expensive. How did you guys decide, let's go all in on Beni? Did you go out and fundraise? Kind of what was that next step after graduation?
So Sarah was all in from the beginning. She, so I was helping her through this class, but she was really like leading the charge, and she worked on it through the summer between our first and second year, and through that process raised a pre-seed of $1 million. And so coming back into our second year, there was a little bit more seriousness to the conversation of like, I'm going to do this. Do you want to be on board? I think at that point I wasn't fully ready to commit, because to your point, I was like, I've just invested all this money. Like I had an expectation on kind of what the next step would look like. But I'll say that lasted for maybe 2 months. It's like, I want to just work with you like pretty much full time on this to get a sense of if we work well together, if I'm really excited about the idea and believe that like we can be the ones to do it. And after a couple of months of doing that, I was pretty sold. It's like, this is so much fun. I feel like we have such an amazing idea. And then with Celine also coming in, Celine ended up quitting her full-time job to do this full-time after we raised the pre-seed. And so I think with her too, it was like, all right, we've got this badass software engineer, like Sarah's awesome. We've got an amazing idea. Like, let's do it. And I think for me, the financial part is one side, because I think, you did give up a salary for 2 years. You're making way less than you would make. If you went back into a normal job, there's less security, all of that. But I also feel like it was the time in my life where, I don't have a family yet. I'm able to take the risk. And so if not now, when? And I think that was kind of the motivating factor for me to say, I'd be kicking myself. These other jobs will be there if this doesn't work out, but I will be kicking myself if we don't give it everything we have right now, because it's such a unique thing, I think, in the startup world to have an idea where when you explain it to someone, there is such an obvious aha moment of, yes, that's a huge problem. And that seems like such a simple solution. Why didn't anyone think of that before? And I feel like that's what we have with Beni. And so I couldn't give up. Yeah, I couldn't give up the opportunity to try to make it work.
That's pretty wild that you guys were able to raise funding while still in school, because I feel like some investors and even like accelerator programs have issues with founders not being quote unquote full time on the business. Was there any reservations around that, or your investors were totally comfortable with you guys still being in school?
I think Sarah bore the brunt of the fundraising in the beginning. And so I think she was just really convincing. She likes to say she was full-time Beni and part-time school, because we were working on it, a crazy number of hours and kind of balancing the rest on the side. But I think, to your earlier question, business school is an awesome time to start a company. I don't think it's the only way. I think there's lots of paths, obviously. But if you find yourself in business school, it is an amazing time, because every teacher becomes an advisor. Every class, you're the class project is the startup. You have a lot of ways to get non-dilutive funding through grants and case competitions and all of that stuff. And so I think we basically just use the business school experience to incubate this. And I think there was I think it actually added to our pitch rather than detracting from the pitch, where I feel like if you were trying to start a company and you had another full-time job, it might be harder for investors to see how committed you are. I think in school, you're almost yes, I have this playground to work with, and I'm using all the resources at my disposal to get this as far as I can.
I took the same approach to UCLA Business School. Let me just pass these classes, but every other minute is going into building Bridge Club, building my TikTok, and using all my professors as much as I could for resource and advisory. So smart.
Yeah, and the amazing thing about business school is that you get a lot of responses when you have a .edu email. People are just interested in helping. Yes. They want to take your call. It is like the golden ticket to networking. And so if you use that, it can be a huge advantage.
So true. Sometimes I wish I still had my UCLA email for that very reason.
Same.
Amazing. So when did you guys, once you launched the product, you're obviously the CMO. How did you kind of market Beni, and how did you get your first users?
I think the biggest marketing, honestly, at this stage still is having a great product. And so I think in the beginning, it was really, how do we build a brand? How do we think about making the product experience delightful? We think about Beni as the welcoming party to the world of resale. And so we wanted it to feel really easy to navigate and inclusive. And so the first step was kind of building how does Beni come to life as a brand visually? What is our tone of voice? How do we kind of build the the personification of what Beni is. And so that was a really fun piece of it. And I think we still find a lot of opportunities when we think about what copy goes on the website or in the product itself. How do we build that vibe that we want to curate? And then I think from a marketing perspective, once we had that established, it was like, okay, how do we bring that to social, and how do we make Beni someone you want to follow, someone you want to engage with, and really start to build community around kind of the ethos that we had. And so we've launched a number of different things. Kind of, I think our best advocates are the ones that use the product, that are excited and have found things. And so we've tried a lot of different ways to engage those people. We just launched an affiliate program. So if you are a Beni Power user, it's really easy for you to refer your friends. Ultimately, we're, a free tool. And so I think our best marketing strategy is having a product that delivers, because when it does, you're really motivated, to the same point in the beginning of like the cultural currency of saying, yes, it's thrifted. It's like, if you find something on Beni, like this sweater is from Beni from Through the Real. And anytime someone comments on it, I'm like, oh my God, I found it on this cool app. And so I think, really staying focused on the product at this point. And then on top of that, with additional funding, we're starting to invest for the first time in paid marketing. And so there's a lot you can learn as you go out and experiment on Facebook and Instagram, on Pinterest, on Google search. But I think ultimately the community building is the most important piece at this stage. So we're really focused there.
Tell me more about how you thought about the Beni brand, and how did you what is the Beni brand identity, and how do you think about that?
It's one of my favorite things to talk about, because I think the world of sustainability a lot of the conversation often feels very like doom and gloomy, and almost like shaming you into like, how dare you drink out of that plastic water bottle, which has a place, like you want to educate people, you want people to know the impact of their actions. But I think it puts people on the defensive, and it's not a like welcoming them in. And so when we build Beni, we wanted to really make it inclusive in a way that we talk about meeting shoppers where they are. And I think one of those things is understanding why they're purchasing the things they're purchasing now. And so rather than shaming someone for purchasing fast fashion, it's understanding, well, why are you buying that right now? It's like, well, you're buying it because you want to look cute at the wedding that you're going to, and this was the price point you can afford. It's like, great, let's then meet you where you are and say, hey, I also want to get you a really cute wedding dress, but I want you to get it at a price you can afford. But here's another way to get it that's a little bit more sustainable, and that oftentimes will leave you with a higher quality item in your closet. And so I think the whole ethos was really, we're not going to get people to change their behavior by judging them or by shaming them into it. We have to welcome them in and show them a new way of doing something that actually doesn't really require them to sacrifice, but shows that you can live both sustainably and also abundantly, because you have this new tool that makes it easy to do that. And so I think that kind of feeds into everything. Like you see that in how we've designed the product and in the copy, and also, our little Beni guy, like we want it to feel like your friend that's shopping along with you, and is doing it in a really encouraging way.
I love that. I've definitely felt that guilt, that shame from not shopping sustainably. So very much resonate, and love that that's kind of the ethos behind the Beni brand. I'm curious to learn more about your typical users. Like, who are those typical people using the Beni product at this point?
We've got about 40,000 users at this point. We just started running a onboarding questionnaire, and it's been really interesting to see the results. We have about 30% of people that are totally new to resale. Then another probably 30, 40% that are, I've like bought at a thrift store once, but I'm not like a avid thrifter, or I've only browsed, but I've never purchased. Kind of in this middle category of like, I'm kind of familiar, but I'm not actively, I wouldn't call myself a thrifter. And then you've got, the remaining people who are like, it's my preferred way to shop. I love this. I'll only buy secondhand. And so those people are awesome because, they're using Beni a ton, and they're our best advocates to kind of bring more people into the space because they're the experts. But I'm most excited about kind of those first two categories because from an impact perspective, it is about making resale so easy that kind of anyone, even people that aren't super familiar or who haven't, browsed on all these sites before and are super familiar with how they work, can suddenly be exposed to resale as an option and start considering it in their purchase behavior. And so it's really exciting. We didn't know what the answers to that questionnaire would be. And it's really exciting that we actually are attracting people that are new to resale or curious about it. And Beni's kind of their first exposure to what resale can bring.
I do feel like the most intimidating part about shopping resale is like having to go through all of these sites and like really be in the weeds all the time. So it makes a ton of sense that you guys, 30% of your users are people that have not shopped resale before. That's so cool.
Yeah, I also think it's something where people say like, oh, I want to, but I don't know where to start. And I think one response to that before Beni existed would be like, oh, well, you can go to Poshmark or you can go to The RealReal and you just like type something in. And it's like this whole long explanation of how you would get started or where you should start that journey. And I think what's fun now is that the answer to that conversation is like, oh, we'll just download Beni and like Beni will take it from there and kind of lead you through that process. And so I think that's a lot more digestible for people as the first step.
You mentioned the word community, which I feel like is such a buzzword these days. Can you dive in a little bit more around how you think about community and how that's, really helping grow Beni?
I think it's something that is an ongoing journey. I think that right now we did a campus ambassador program and we had almost 100 college students who were super energized about Beni and had them in a Slack channel, and was really fun to kind of go back and forth and hear their feedback, understand how they were using it, sharing finds, all of that stuff. I think college students, it was hard to kind of keep their attention for a long time. And I think we also learned that from a community perspective, there's some benefits to having like a curated space that's private to just people who have opted in. But I think often you want to build in public and make a space that anyone can join and then engage with, but in a more public forum. We haven't figured out what the perfect public forum is. So a lot of it is still this like on our Instagram feed or in the comment section on our TikTok. We've also expanded outside of just college students to this affiliate program. So we're starting to work with stylists and fashion influencers and people who I think are in the industry feeling like, I don't want to be this promoter of more consumption of new, but I don't really have a way to get people to secondhand options right now. A lot of them have been really excited to have Beni as a tool that they can share with their followers and clients. But I think I think we've got a lot of people that are Beni lovers and that are excited to share. I think there's still some work to do for us of like creating that forum where all of them can talk to each other. I think that ultimately is the dream community where we can kind of create the space, but then we're not managing it on a day-to-day basis. To me, that's like the brands that do that really well are that's what they've created, is where people are kind of self-managing the community space. That's the dream. We're not quite there yet, but have a lot of people that I think would put up their hands to join that as we continue to build it.
Moving a bit towards fundraising. So as you mentioned, your team raised $1 million pre-seed, and then you went on to raise $4 million at the seed from investors including XYZ Ventures, Better Ventures, and Buoyant Ventures. I'd love to hear your perspective as someone who fundraised for the first time. Like, what were your biggest lessons? What advice would you give for other founders going out to raise their first round of funding?
I will say that Sarah put on a masterclass of how to do this and really was the leader from the Beni side of a lot of these conversations. And so what I can share is really my experience kind of watching the process unfold and going through the emotional journey. And I think a couple pieces of advice or just observations. One is like, you will expect it to be hard and it will be harder. I think that it is an emotional roller coaster, just the sheer number of conversations that you're having. Like every single conversation, you need to be upbeat and super energized and like ready to run through a brick wall and give off this perception that like you are going to be the 1% of people that actually makes this thing happen. And I think to do that 100 times in a row is really taxing. So I think, yeah, being able to do that 100 times in a row while also running a business, while also having, rejection be the meeting right before you get on that call, is you really have to find ways to self-regulate your emotions and be able to just turn it on and be on in those times. And I think that is a crazy thing to expect of people, but is kind of part of what is needed in order to be successful. And so I think finding ways to be like not get too high or too low, but just be steady through it is really critical. I think the other piece is don't count your chickens before they hatch. It's not done until like the papers are signed and the money is wired. I think in the beginning, especially with the seed round, we got to like the third, fourth, fifth round of diligence with a number of people. And I think you start in your mind to be like, okay, we see the light at the end of the tunnel. Like we're done. Cause like this is going to close. Like, that conversation went great. We're in the clear. And then for whatever reason, it doesn't come through and you're like, okay, back to the drawing board. And I think as that process went on, you keep the hope, obviously, like you want to stay optimistic, but you don't allow yourself to kind of like jump past the stage that you're at. You're very realistic about kind of, we need to have as many irons in the fire as we can because any one of these could fall at any point. And so I think really making sure that you like push things all the way to the finish line before you stop and celebrate, or before you have that sigh of relief that like we're done, because you're not done until it's really done. And then I think the last piece, or that was interesting for us, is like the FOMO is super real, and it felt like pulling teeth for a long time. And then once you get someone to bite, it's like then everyone jumps in because they don't want to miss out. And I think that is just a weird phenomenon where you're like, why? What was this giant shift? But we saw that in our seed round. We were raising 3 million. We were like, how are we going to get there? Then someone jumped. And then, all of a sudden 2 weeks later, we're oversubscribed and raising 4. And I think it happens quickly, but the FOMO is real. So finding ways to use that to your advantage, I think is helpful. It's hard to do, but I think is a very real phenomenon.
The FOMO effect is very, very, very real, which is, I don't know, kind of funny and not great, but when you can use it to your advantage, got to use it to your advantage.
Yeah.
In terms of like what you guys look for in investors, walk me through like who your ideal investor is and what they really bring to the table other than just a check in the door.
I think that ultimately the startup journey is a roller coaster. And so you want people on your team that really believe in the idea and that believe in you, because you're going to go through a lot of periods of uncertainty. You're going to be super excited one day and then be like, I don't know, like I hit this wall and I don't know how to get through. And I think you want people in your corner that are going to support you and push you through those moments and be there to support you. I think in the our investors so far have been a little bit more climate focused, which I think is awesome. They kind of see from a sustainability perspective the impact that we can have. And so they've been awesome partners and supporters of the mission. And really, we are quite mission driven. I think as we look forward, I would personally love to have like a real consumer VC on our cap table. I think that we are trying to make this big consumer behavior shift. And so people that really understand consumer and kind of the growth engine from a consumer side would be awesome people to have in our corner. But yeah, I think ultimately we're super lucky to have awesome investors that I feel like we can be pretty open with and who we lean on for advice and support. And so I think there is just also I'll say we're completely female funded. So our board meetings are really fun to like have 3 female founders and all female investors. We probably could use a little bit more diversity, but it's really kind of empowering to sit, on the Zoom call sometimes and say, this is a pretty badass group of women doing this.
That's amazing. I knew you were female founded completely. I did not realize female funded completely. That's really epic.
I do think it's interesting as we fundraise. I worked on the VC side during an internship in business school. And I think as you're evaluating companies, it's a lot easier to evaluate companies that you feel like you'd be a consumer of or a user of. And so it is interesting as we think about investors. I think the shopping world, it was easier to kind of relate to female investors who are looking at it saying, yeah, I do that. I'm like, I spent way too much money on this thing the other day and I would have loved to have it secondhand, but I wasn't going to, like they get the problem kind of instantly. I think that is kind of one of the inherent issues with the VC world because there are not as many female investors as there should be. But I think that's kind of our mission now is like, how do you make this aha moment able to be experienced by a broader group of investors and get more people to kind of see the potential. It's not just this, little girls doing a shopping app. It's like an AI powered machine that is, transforming the way that people consume, and re-commerce is the next e-commerce. And so how do you kind of speak in a maybe different language to attract different types of investors?
I can definitely see how that is a bit of a block when you are going out to pitch male investors. But hopefully, I do think more and more people are jumping onto re-commerce. Like my husband is truly addicted to the Faraday resale shop. It's hilarious. He's like trading clothes in. Like every week there's a new box. But he's like, I returned something, so I got a credit and I bought something new. It's hilarious to watch. Yeah.
I actually think men is a big bet for resale, because I think the other thing that is nicer for men's clothing is that the styles don't change over as frequently. So like if you have a polo button down, it's like, well, that's been the same polo button down for the last 15 years. There's a ton of inventory out there. The likelihood that you can find a blue one in your size is really high. And so I think male resale I think there's a lot of opportunity for men and lots of discounts. So easier way to shop.
Amazing. Well, as we start to wrap things up, I will close with my favorite question. Can you share a female founder, investor, or leader who inspires you and a bit about why?
I am obsessed with Sarah Blakely, which is probably why I have a big ass calendar from her husband, because I follow all of their content on Instagram and on TikTok. I think she is mostly inspiring because she's really authentically herself. I think it's really easy to be a female founder and feel like you have to play into the tropes of like what a founder is. And I think oftentimes you then end up changing how you communicate or how you connect with people or how you lead. And I think she just she's really fun to follow. She really, I think, started a little bit or she did start later on in her life. And I think she probably was a little bit more grounded in herself as she took on this journey where there's lots of highs and lows. And so I think she's just a great model of doing it in your own style and kind of being authentic to yourself as you chart this path. I also think it's really fun. She just has like incredible hustle. And I think ultimately it is a grind, and it is I'm going to prove you wrong, and I'm going to have a little chip on my shoulder and prove to you why I should be taken seriously, and why this thing that you're kind of, dismissing as whatever is actually a huge business opportunity. And so I hope we can do something similar with Beni and do it in a style that's authentic to us.
Totally agree. Obsessed with Sarah. And I feel like she really does come off so authentic, especially online, which I really appreciate. And I'm now inspired to create a big ass calendar myself.
It'll change your life, I promise.
Amazing. And then lastly, where can everyone find you? Where can people sign up for Beni?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Kate Sanner. And also I'm starting to dip my toe into TikTok. So if you want to follow along on that journey at Kate Sanner, no promises, but we're working on it. And then for Beni, easiest to follow us on all social channels at join_Beni. And then if you search Beni in the App Store, it's a free, easy download. So I would urge you to give it a try. If you want to get on your computer, you can also go to the website, joinbeni.com.
Amazing. Well, Kate, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to finally meet you in person at South by Southwest next week.
It's so great to be here as well, and can't wait to see you at South by too.